So next, let's move to the coding. So with the coding, we will start with the access database, and anytime we get to a point where there are differences between the access and then the SQL server, then we would introduce those differences and then put the code in the different places. All right. So the first thing is to, for access database, the first thing is to go and copy the access database from wherever you have it into the debug folder, right? So the bin and then the debug folder. So when you do that, then it will make your connection string shorter, and then it also simplifies your problems anytime you have to copy your application and put it in on a different system or run it on a different system. But then with the access, with the SQL database, you don't need to copy the files and put it anywhere. All you need is just a link to the server. Wherever the server is located, you just change the connection string and connect directly to that server without any issue. All right, so let's first of all go to our project folder. So we can go to our project folder by going to the Solutions Explorer, and then you open the Solutions Explorer, and then you right-click on your project name, and then you go to Open Folder in Explorer. So once we go there, we would open the folder that contains our project work, about our current solution. So when we click on that, it should open this. So once it opens this, we will see our new project that is here. Okay. So this is our Contact Manager app. So we go to this guy, go to this guy, and this is our project. All right. So the file we just ran a few minutes ago should be somewhere in here. So that is this file, right? So that is our form that we were working with. That's fantastic. All right, so this is where we would, wherever you have your access database, that is if you are using access database. If you are not using access database and you are using SQL, you don't need to do this stage. So we would have to go and find the access database wherever it is, and then we would copy it and come and place it here. All right. So I have my access database somewhere here. So all I need to do is just copy it. All right. Let me see which of the access databases I'm copying. So that is, copy this. Let me see which type of database that is. So this is the 2007 and above database. So let me copy that. So when I copy that, I'll bring it to my Contact Manager app, the debug folder, and then I just paste it in here. So once I paste it in here, then I'll be able to connect to it without having to reference a very long directory to get there. And then when I copy this to a different application or a different computer, all I will need to do is just copy this debug folder. So once you copy this debug folder, you will have both your data and then your application, and you can go and run it on any other computer at all. All right. So once we copy and paste our database here, then we are ready to go and write our code. So we can close that, and then we go and write our code. So the first code that we will write would actually be some global variables that we need to create. So these global variables are actually the various classes that we spoke about. So we'll create a connection object, we'll create a connection string, we will create a data adapter object, we create a data set, we create a command builder, then we'll create some basic variables that we would need for our project. So once we create those variables, then in any of these our sub procedures or any of the functions that we'll create or any of the events that we will handle, we will now use these variables to actually perform certain tasks that we will set for ourselves. All right. So let's go to the module level. So let's look for our code, view code. So we just right click anywhere on the form and go like view code. So all our module variables will come here. But remember, when we're discussing Windows Form applications, I mentioned that when we are working with Microsoft Access databases, we will have to import a certain library, which is the OLEDB library. So we will import the systems.data.oledb library that we are going to use for our Access database. For SQL database, on the other hand, we would have to import the SQL client database. All right. So if you are using SQL Server, so you have to import the systems.data.sql client. So that is basically the two libraries that we need to work with our two databases. All right. So we'll start with the Access database. So we'll first of all start with this. So we just write import system.data.oledb oledb is not sure. Okay, so this is what we want to import. So this is what will give us access to most of the classes that we'll need to work with Access database. So once we import this library, we can now create the various variables that we want to work with, or we create the various objects that we need in order to establish our connection. And as I said, we'll create most of these variables at the module level so that we can use them in multiple functions and sub-procedures. So we'll first of all create our connection object. So if you are creating a connection object for SQL, for Access database, we'll create the OLEDB connection, right? And then we'll create the OLEDB data adapter. Then we'll create the OLEDB command builder, right? And then we said that the data set is actually a neutral class, that it by the time we actually bring data into the data set, it's already in the form of XML. So we don't need to specify whether it is the OLEDB or Access or Oracle or whatever. It is just a data set. All right. So let's first of all create the command, the connection object. So we have time new OLEDB, right? Dot OLEDB. We're looking for the connection. So this is what we need. So we hit on enter. And then we move to the next one. So we created a connection object. So the next thing is to create the data adapter that will use that connection object, right? So we have time, right? So we could have the data adapter as new OLEDB data adapter, right? So let me just note this. Some of you are going to face some challenges here that are not supposed to be challenges for some of you. Some versions, as soon as you import the system.data.oledb, then you don't need to indicate the oledb in front of the connection and then the adapter and then the command, right? But some versions will still require you to bring this. So as you can see, my version didn't complain when I did not bring the oledb dot in front of the oledb adapter. So if yours is complaining, then just prefix this so that it will pick it up and then you work with it. All right. So I could just remove this and just write them raw without any issue. Right? If you are not able to do that, don't worry. Just put the oledb dot in front of this, and that will work just fine for you. So we have another time. Now we will have to create a data set. So we have DS as new data set, right? Okay, so these are the three main objects we need here. So we will just create some other variables that we would need to work with this. So we'll create a variable to hold our SQL query. Then we'll create another to hold a connection string. We'll create another to hold at least some other variables. So let's create our these. So some of them are, most of them are actually strings, and some of them you have integers and stuff. So let's have our connection string. So we created the connection string. So we have con string, capital here, just to show that there are two words put together. Con string as string. Then we have time SQL string. Then we have time okay, so we I think we have more variables here. Let's see. Okay, we have max rows. So this is an integer that will count the total number of rows you have in your table, right? So this as integer. Then time. So the next thing is we create a new data row. So we remember how we did that in our lecture. So DS new row as data row. Okay. Okay. So these are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, it looks like all the variables we need so far. Now, if for some reason we forget any, we will come back here and then we'll add more variables to it. Okay. So this guy here, let me just remove it so that we'll start on a clean sheet. So these are the global variables or the module level variables. So we would use these variables to connect to our database and then retrieve the data and put them on the form. So, but we want our program to work in such a way that by the time our form loads and comes up, it will already have all the data. It will already connect the data and then retrieve the data and put it on the user interface. All right, so we are going to write our connection inside the load event of our form, right? So here we just double click on any part of the form to end up on the form 1 load event. All right, so once we are here, we can now begin to set up our form. All right, so we are trying to do all this for the access, and then later we will do same for the SQL. Now, of course, these variables here, instead of only DB connection, will be SQL connection, right? SQL adapter and so on. So in the load event, we would first of all, as I told you the other week, the first thing we need to do is to create a connection string. And when we create the connection string, then we'll also create the command, or we create the SQL query. Now, then we'll pass these two as parameters to the data adapter object. So once we pass them, then the data adapter object, we use that to connect to the database and then retrieve the data. And then we can now fill a data set with the results. All right. So let's start this. So usually we put this in a try statement, and try statement or try catch structure is used to attempt to execute some code, and when there's an error, it just jumps to catch the error, and then it displays the error for us. I think in the week 2 lecture, you will see detailed explanation of this structure in at the end of the lecture. So please, those of us who haven't downloaded those lectures for, I think, week 2, where we discussed the Windows database applications, and we spoke about the data access technologies. We also spoke about the try-catch structure. And I think about 2 hours or so is needed to study that. So please, those of us who haven't done that, just go and download that lecture slide. It's on the course page. Just download it, and then you go through it, and you get a proper understanding of the try-catch structure. So the gist of it is this side of the code is executed, and if it is executed successfully, then it will exit the structure and go to the end, try and come to start here. But if during the execution of this code an error occurs, it will stop immediately and then come into this side and then process that data and process the error and then display the error for you. All right, so try executing whatever is put here, and if an error occurs, stop executing and jump to this side and then process the error and display to the user. So that's basically what that structure means. So we put all our connection codes here, hoping that if there's an error, it will catch that particular error, and then we can output it to the user. All right. So the first thing, as I said, is to create our connection string. So we say const string. What is that? Okay, const string is here. Is equal to, we said const string is the normal string, but then of course within that string we would have certain parts. So we have the provider, and then we'll have a data source. Now the provider here, because I'm using Microsoft Office 2000, let me just be sure. I'm using Microsoft Office 2007 to 2016 or so database. So in this case, I would use the SDE, the Microsoft SDE OLEDB 2.0 or 12.0 engine, right? If you are using Access 2003 and below, you would be required to use the Jet engine, right? The Microsoft Jet engine for your work. So let's, those of us who are using that, you are using a version that is less than 2007. you just go into the lecture slide that you downloaded from the course page. The connection string is there. You can just copy it and paste it in your work. So here we'll type provider is equal to, then we'll have the Microsoft Jet engine. So we have the Microsoft ACE, Microsoft dot ACE dot 3, that's I think 12.0. But first of all, we have to have OLEDP dot. So we have Microsoft ACE OLEDP, okay, 12.0. Then we have data source that is also this guy here. Let me check the name of my database. That's contact db dot ACCDB. That's the name of my database. Now, the reason why we have a very short data source value is because we copied our database into the debug folder. So here, the application and the database would all be, or the application and the data, the access data base file are all inside the same folder. So in that case, all we need to do is just indicate the name of the file and then the extension of the file. But if we had it in a separate folder, then we will have to write the full directory of where that application is. And then also, we could also write this directory relative to where the application is located. And you find some of the examples in the lecture slides that I gave you earlier on. So here, this is a very short connection string that we have because I don't have a username and a password on my database, so we won't be indicating any. If you had any, we'll put a semicolon here, then we'll type the user ID, then we'll also type the password, all on that same line. All right. So if we don't have, since I don't have that, then I don't have to indicate that. But as I said, if you have passwords and you are confused how it is done, just open your lecture slide and then you go to where we discuss connection strings. You will see different types of connection strings that are put there as examples. So you can look at the one that best suits your case, and then you can copy it and paste it in your code. Okay. But as much as possible, I always try to make that simple by copying the access database into where my data is located. But of course, I understand the fact that you might be working on a project where the data is not easily brought into your computer. Then you have to indicate where exactly that database is located, either on the server or on the network. So you just make sure you indicate the correct directory to where it is saved. All right. So once we create the connection string, the next thing would be to pass that connection string to our connection object, right? So we have our connection object, which is the con is equal to, so we instantiate that is we create an object from our connection string, our connection object, and then we pass the connection string to it. So pass the connection string to it like this. So this is where we actually complete the creation of the connection string. The connection object. So we created a connection object here. We come here and then we instantiated it and passed this particular variable to it. This particular parameter to it. So now we can create an SQL query and then pass both the connection object and the SQL query to the data adapter object, right? So in that case, we would have finished setting up our connection. Then we can open and copy whatever we like, right? So here, after we set up our connection, so we can now open the connection. All right, so once we open the connection, let's create our SQL. So if you want, you can create a SQL before you open the connection. If you want, you can leave it also and do it before that. It doesn't really matter. So SQL, what SQL do we want to do? We want to select all the data from the person underscore TB table, right? So we have select. We select all from person underscore TB. Okay. So we select all from TB. So at least I have a table called TB. And if you've done all the exercises that we are supposed to do from the beginning of the semester till now, you should have a database called contact DB. Of course, some of you have Access database, some of you have SQL database. All right. So once you create your SQL statement or your SQL query, then the next thing will now be to pass all that to the data adapter. That is, you pass your connection object and then your SQL query to your data adapter. So we have data adapter is equal to new OLEDB data adapter in bracket. So you have the SQL, comma, and then you have the connection object also. So this is what we would get at the end of the day. So once we are here, then our connection has been set. So by the time we are done executing this statement, this data adapter object here would have some data, right, that it has connected to the database. That is, it used this to connect to the database and executed this query on the database. So we can now fill a data adapter, a data set with that data, right? So whatever data is retrieved by executing this query on the database, it will have that data still intact. Then we will fill a data set with that data. So we'll have data adapter dot. So we use a fill method of the data adapter to actually do all that. So we have data adapter dot fill. So we fill a particular data set, and then we fill a particular table that is inside the data set, and we name that table the address book, right? So that's the name. So this is the data set that we want to fill our information, the data into. But that data set contains a table that we have named address book. So that table is going to contain the result of the execution of this query. All right, so it's going to contain all the rows that were inside the person table that has been retrieved by the data adapter. So once we fill the data, then we can comfortably close the connection. So we have con.close, right? So we can close the connection. Remember, I said Adu.NET is actually a disconnected technology, which means you connect, you retrieve data, and then you disconnect and work on your computer. As and when you want to reestablish, then you can reestablish your connection, and then you do whatever you want to do. So once we execute this without any issue, then we have to exit. But if we execute this and then there's an error somewhere, then we will come and execute this side of this code. So what do we do when there's an error? So we find the error message, and then we'll come and output the error message. All right. Now remember, some of the versions will not have X, so they will have catch XEX. Some versions will have EX, and some versions will have EXE. So if your version has EX, then the next code will be EX. If your version has EXE, then the next code will be EXE. For instance, we want to output a message box with a certain message. So every message that comes would have a message number and will also have a message. So every error message will always have an error number and then an error message. So we want to retrieve the error message and then show it to the user, right? So here we'll use the XE dot, so we just retrieving both the message and then the number. So that's to convert it to string, right? Then we just output. So we have message or show exception to string. So we'll extract the message, the error message, and then the error number and everything. We just extract it and then we show it to the user on a message box. Now, but if we are able to do this, the end without any error, then we don't even tackle here at all. We just move here. So what do we need to do? When we are able to connect, we call a method that we call navigate records. So we will write that method later on, right? So let's just call that method. So we'll create the method later on. Navigate record. So if you underline it, but don't worry, we'll create that later on. Create and then disable controls. So it is also a method, or it is also a sub procedure that we'll create in a moment. Then we want it in such a way that when the program starts, commit will not be active, save will not be active, and cancel will not be active. Now remember, we said that for somebody to add new record, the person clicks on this to prepare this here. And the user now fill in the information. It is only after the user has filled in the information that the user will commit that data into the database. So until you click on this thing here shouldn't be active. And then it is only when you either click on add or update that you can cancel. So until you click on this or this thing here also should be disabled. The same way you click on update to allow you to clear and create all these things, to fill in your data, then you can hit save to now save the changes. So if you don't click on update, there's no need for you to be able to click on save. So that is why when the program comes up, we would want to disable the commit, we want to disable the save, and we want to disable the cancel, so that it is only when we click on these buttons that we activate this. The same way, we also want our application, because we want it to be in several modes. That is, when we are viewing, we cannot change anything. So we can just view all these in read only until we decide to add. When we decide to add, then it makes this thing editable. Then we can edit them and save. As soon as we commit, then it goes back to what? Uneditable, right? The same way if we want to update to make it editable for us to be able to update. But when it's done updating and we are just navigating, we don't need to make them editable. So we just make them read only as we are going. So we will write methods or we'll create sub-procedures to disable this. We'll create sub-procedures to clear the data. We'll create sub-procedures also to enable them later on when we want to add or update and so on. So those are the sub-procedures that you will see in our next, in the next few minutes. Then here also, we would need to be able to link this. So we'll link this to the various fields or various columns of the table. So we will, when we put them in the various columns, then we can show each column on this. So that is what the navigate record is about, linking each column on our table to a particular user interface object. For instance, the contact ID or the PID of the person table will be linked to this particular text box table, so that anytime you click on next, that data would be here. The same way, first name will be linked to this particular one here. This will be linked to last name and so on. So we are going to link each of these objects to a particular column of a particular table, right? So the linking is what we will put under the navigate record method. All right. So that is what we will do next. Next, we will write all these methods. But let's go and complete our load event. So we say we'll disable these guys here when the form comes up. So let's disable them. So we have BTN. Let's say the first is cancel dot enables equals false, right? So if you want to disable something, you just say the enables is false, right? So apart from cancel, even the commit also, so we have BTN commit dot enables equals false. Then the last button is, so we have commit cancel. The last button is save. So we have BTN save dot enables equals false. Okay, so we are done with the form load event for the Microsoft Access database. All right, so the next thing we do for that is to create the navigate record and then the disable record as well as the enable record. And I said the navigate record is just linking each of these here to a particular field in the table. All right. So let's go ahead and create this method. So let's just say linking each control or object to a specific column of a table. So in order to do that, so we create the navigate record. All right, so we have private sub keyboard, private sub navigate record. once we create that, then we now begin to link the various items to the various fields of the table. All right. So let me just write the first line. Let's see how we can quickly understand that. So the first thing is what? The TXT ID. So let's use the ID as our first item. The text. All right. It's equal to then the data set. Right. Remember, the table is inside the data set. So anytime we want to refer to a table, we will use the data set, the tables, to actually retrieve the table. Then we will now use the rows and then identify a particular column in the row. Now remember, every table has rows, and then the rows are just like two-dimensional array, where the table is like a two-dimensional array where every row would have certain columns. So the row would have column 0, right? Row 0 will have column 0, column 1, column 2 to the number of columns that you have. Then you move to row 1, that will also have the same number of columns. So we use the same principle to navigate through a table. So the data set, the tables, right, into brackets. Which table are we talking about? We are talking about the address book, which we created here, right, to handle this. So we use the address book, right? That is the table we are talking about. Then dot rows. So we want to talk about the rows in the address book table, right? Then we use this variable here to represent the particular row ID. Now, when we talk about row ID, we said that a table is like a two-dimensional array with indexing starting from 0. So a 0 index kind of system. So the first row is the 0 row, the second row is the 1 row, and the third row is the 2 row, and so on and so forth. So we are going to use this ink, that is the index or the suffix of the array to actually find what item we are talking about. So this ink here will start from 0. So 0 meaning the first row, and then 1 meaning the second row, then and so on. So if you are able to use a for loop or a while loop to generate this ink, then we can easily navigate through the various rows of the table. So ink item. So which row? Which column of the row? So the item here actually just means what? The particular column, right? So and columns also are what? 0 index. So you have 0 column, 1, and then 2 and 3 up to the total number, right? -1. Okay. So the item here, so we say item 0 is actually, what don't they like? Okay, they don't like ink. So it means we didn't declare ink anywhere. All right. So let's declare ink. So we have time, ink as integer, right? Okay. So once we declare ink here, now that error should disappear. So we would have, we said that this here would be the 0 index. So for instance, let me just quickly run the previous code that we ran and use that for testing. So this one here is the first row, right? If you come here, this is the second row, this is the third row. But then the first row would have the first item, second item, third item, fourth item, fifth item, sixth, seventh, eighth, a knife item. Now, each of these items here just represents a particular column of that row. So when we move next, then we will have this row, and then we will have the various columns of that row. Then we move next, then we have another row, then we have the various columns of that row. So basically we are linking, we use the ink to represent a particular row, and then we now use the items to represent this. So this is item 0, which is the first column of the table. This is item 1, which is the second column of the table. Item 2, third column of the table, and so on. But this row here has a particular row index. So for instance, the first row, which is this row, has an index of 0. The second row has an index of 1, and so on. So when you want to find a particular column of, the particular field, then you have to identify the particular row it is in, and then the particular column of that row. Then we can identify that particular piece of data or that particular record. All right. So in that case, when we come here, so what we've written here is that any number that represents ink. So if ink is equal to 0, then we are on the first row. So when we are on the first row, then the first index or the first item or the first column of that row would be displayed in the TXT ID. If we are on the second row, still the first item of that row or the first column of that row will be displayed here. So at all times, this TXT ID will be displaying the ID of the contact. All right, so the second item, that is the second column would actually, of the row, would actually also be the same thing. So we would have TXT F name, the text is equal to ds dot tables, which is which table are we talking about? We are talking about our address book table dot rows brackets, which row is still the ink. So the ink will be the same for the entire row, but then the items would be different on each control. So we have item 1. Okay, so we do the same for all the rest. So what we are going to do, what I'm going to do is I'm quickly going to copy and paste and just change the various things. Let me see how many things we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we have 9. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we will have so this is F name. So we have L name, which is the this number 2. And we have after L name, what did we have? So with here, we have to be really specific about the order in which the columns in your table actually come. Now, if the ID is first name is next, last name is next, it has to follow in the same order you have them in the table. So if you mix them up, then you begin to insert the wrong data into the wrong field. So you insert, or you'll be displaying the date of birth in the name text box, or you'll be displaying the address in the email text box, and so on and so forth. So in all this, go back to your table and then look at the order in which your columns are arranged, and then you arrange these ones in the same way. So you have L name. So the next one I have is actually the, let me cross check here. Okay, let me cross check here. That's the only way I can know for sure. So I have the ID, first name, last name, gender, date of birth, stuff like that. Okay. So once you open your Access file, you will see the order in which they came. So this is item 1, this is item 2, this is item 0, item 1, item 2, item 3, up to item 8. So once you know the order in which they come, then you can quickly go back and then you make your changes. So we have gender, so txt gender, there no txt gender in this list. Let's go back here and see. Okay, it's a combo box. All right, so you have cmb gender.text equal to 3. Then we have date time picker. We have date time date of birth dot. Now here we won't discuss we won't use the text property because date time pickers usually use the value property. So the date is always the value of the date time picker. So we are going to use the date time picker dot value, right, to actually take this data. So this will be number 4. All right. Then after that, we go to the mail and the phone. So txt email, the txt, where is mail? The text, so that will be the number 5. Then we have txt phone number dot text is equal to this, so that will be number 6. Then we have txt address. The txt address will be number 7. And then txt details would be number 8. So once we do this, then navigate record is complete. So when you go back to your form load event, you see that the navigate record is now good. So the next thing is to create the disable control. So disable control basically is talking about these controls, basically making them uneditable, right? So you can use the read only. You can also use the enable to disable them, right? So we create another sub procedure that we will name private sub. Then we'll have, what name did we give to it? Disable controls. Disable controls. Okay. So once we do this, writing this thing here should have disappeared. I didn't write them correctly. So let's copy this guy here and paste it here just to be sure that these names are the same. So once we copy that and paste here, so disable control, okay. I put an S there at the time. So once we do that, then we will have to now go to every one of them, right? And then we put a read only, and then we change the read only to false, right? So here we would change the read only to true to disable it. So we have the first one. So remember, we are not going to deal with this one is just to show the data. That is for the index. As I told you, my ID is auto-generated. So once it's auto-generated, you don't need to insert it anytime you want to insert data or update it or whatever. It is just there. So you don't need, the user doesn't really need to interact with it anyway, apart from just looking at it or apart from seeing it. But then when it comes to the all the other controls, the user should be able to interact with them at a certain point. So when we call navigate record, we are only going to have it here. But then in the all the other methods and all the other sub procedures, we are not going to add the contact ID because it will not be necessary to do that. So let's quickly run down this. So we start with first name. So txt fname dot read only equals true. Then txt. So we do that for all of them. txt last name or lname dot read only equals true, right? Of course, the only items that don't have read only are actually the combo box and then the datetime picker. So once they don't have read only, we will resort to using the enables, right? So we make the enables false. So in that case, then we will have something to disable them. So we have combo box, cmb gender dot text. Now we use the dot enabled is equal to false. Then we have datetime picker dot enabled is equal to false. Then we have txt mail dot read only equals true. txt after mail we go to phone dot read only equals true. txt address dot read only equals true. txt details dot read only equals true. So that is the whole stack. Of course, we can also write another one for enable. That is, anytime we are done, let's say after we disable the all this, and then we want to add, it has to enable them so that we'll be able to make them editable so that we'll be able to edit. After that, then it will disable them, then we won't be able to edit. So in that case, the opposite of this is the enable. So in that case, I will just copy this one here and paste it down here and just make some changes to it. So this one, instead of disable, we will have what? Enable, right? So enable control. So in here, so instead of true, it should be what? False. So here, read only will be false throughout. So this enable will now be true. Enable will now be true. Read only will be false. Read only will be false. So the same thing. So that is enable control. The same way we would have the clear, so that when we want to add a new record, we will have to clear all the data from this. So apart from enabling it, we also need to clear, right? So once we do that, then we'll be able to insert new. So it is also the same thing, right? So instead of this one, so we will have the text, the TXT. So here we will have a clear record. Clear. Let's make it capital. Clear record. Right. So here we would have the text. I just try and copy and paste just so that I won't forget any of those text boxes, so I won't forget the order. So other than that, there's no reason to copy and paste. You can write it yourself. All right. So we have the F name. You clear it, right? So we have F name. Clear it like this. The text is equal to clear it. The text is equal to clear it. The value. So here, we won't want to actually clear this. So usually what we want is to bring today's dates, right? So usually with the datetime picker, it's not good to clear it, right? So you bring today's date there. So you can just bring something like today, right? Just leave it there. So this here will bring today's date, right? So if you just write today with this, right, it will bring today's date. All right. So anytime you clear the controls, the datetime picker will rather have today's date. Okay, so you have the text is equal to you clear. The text equal to you clear. The text is equal to clear. The text Okay. So of course here we might also want to bring it to the default value, which is the female. So we could put female here, right, for the combo box. So once you clear, you bring it to female and then bring this to today's date. But all the others, you clear all the text from there. So once we do this, at least we should be good to test our application. So what do? We created some global variables, that is the connection object, data adapter, data set, and then we connect the connection string, then the SQL query. Then we created a variable to hold the maximum number of rows in a table, that's an integer. And then we created this other variable to hold the new row or the table row. Then we created this variable here to act as an index to for the table, and that index basically is the row index of each table, which is 0 index. So we will use that to actually identify which row we are in. Then we can now identify each column of the row by using the index, which is the item of that row. And then we use that to display the various rows or the various columns of the row inside a particular text box or a particular control that is on the form. Then after that, of course, before that, we created a connection and executed all the things that we spoke about. Then we disabled all the controls on the form so that they will be read only and the user should only be able to view and not be able to edit until he clicks on a specific button that indicates that he wants to edit. Then in that case, then all the controls will also be enabled, giving the person the functionality to actually edit the data. But once he wants to insert new record, then every record in the controls or in the object must be cleared. So we also created this here to clear the record. So that is what we have done so far. So let's run our code and see what we would get. Now, this is a typical error most of you get. I think they're saying the Microsoft AC, this provider is not registered on this system. Now, usually there are two reasons why this error would show. The first reason, which is the most common, is that you are trying to run your .NET in, let's say, you didn't specify which type of processor you are using to run your .NET, whether it is actually a 32-bit or a 64-bit. You just target the default CPU. So they are not able to actually render this very well. And then the second reason could be that you did not install this particular driver when you were installing your Visual Studio. So these two things can actually cause these kind of problems to arise. So let's see if we can quickly go and check. Because if we try the first solution, which is to check whether the CPU that it is running in is the correct CPU that is selected, that is always the easiest way to solve this problem. But if we try that and it doesn't work, then most probably we will have to change our database into Microsoft 2003 and below. Now that is going to give us a chance to be able to run this and test it for the meantime until such a time where we are able to go online and download the driver to install, right? But when that happens, if you test that and it doesn't work, then you have to go online and download the ACE OLEDP driver to install, all right? So let's quickly close this, and let's go and check to see whether we are running this well. So in order to do that, we can come to our Solutions Explorer, and then we open the, we right click on the Solutions Explorer, and then we go to Properties. So look for your property, project name, right click on it, and then you go and look for Properties. When you click on Properties, to take you to your project configuration or project setup form, where you can actually set up your application. So usually what you are looking for should be, I think it should be somewhere in compile. Now, once you are in compile, then you look for target CPU, right? That is it. So you look for target CPU. So you see that here, it is any CPU. So if it is any CPU, we are not very specific with the target CPU. We need to select. So since I'm using 64-bit CPU, I will just choose 64-bit CPU from here. So you go to your Solutions Explorer, right click on your project name, and then you select Properties. Then when the Properties window opens, or the configuration windows open, you would look for compile. And then once you find compile, you will look for target CPU in the list. So once you find target CPU, most likely you will find any CPU selected. So you look for your appropriate CPU type. I think mine is 64-bit. So once it's 64-bit, I select that, and then I save. Now after that, if this is actually the cause of the problem, when I run it, it should run. If it is not, then it means I'll have to go online and download the driver to come and install. All right. So we try that, keep our fingers crossed. Right, it has come. So what it means, that was the problem that was causing it. So some of you are going to face this. And once you face that, if you have any issues with it, so go through this process and see if you can quickly resolve it. If you are not able to resolve it using this method, then most probably you have to go online and look for the driver to install. And if you are not able to find the driver to install, then of course the driver is there. If you really want it, you get it to install. But if you want, you can downgrade your Access database to 2003 and below, then you should be able to test this. In that case, you use a totally different driver. Instead of using the Microsoft ACE, you use the Microsoft Jet 4.0 to actually be able to run the Access 2003 and below database. So this is basically where we are now. We have been able to connect to the database, to be able to retrieve the data onto the user interface. So now you can see that even though the data is there, the user is not able to actually do much with it. You can just view it. So the next thing we need to do is to program these here, so that when the user clicks on the last, it will go to the last, it clicks on the first, it will go to the first, and so on. And of course, we are going to rely heavily on the int variable that we created. So that is where we are going to know just like the way we work with arrays, we use the index of that array, and then we will use that to actually move through the array by increasing by 1 or decreasing by 1. So if we want to move to the next row, we just increase by 1. And if we want to move to the previous row, we just subtract 1 from that variable. So that's what we are going to use to actually do that. And then we also use the max row, which is basically the variable that we use to actually hold the total number of rows. So we will use that to know when we are actually at the end of our list. If we are at the end or we are on the first item, right, then we can not try to move forward to cause trouble for ourselves.